Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, Sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Keats is addressing someone or something here. He's saying, thou, you still unravished bride of quietness, you foster child of silence and slow time, you are a Sylvan historian. So who or what is he addressing here? If you want to pause the video and think about it, go ahead. Well, did you get it? That's right. He's addressing the urn itself. It's an ode on a Grecian urn, and he's talking to the urn. So here he says what the urn is, and then he goes on to talk about what the urn can do. It can tell a story, express a flowery tale, better than Keats himself can. And then he brings in a whole range of images. A leaf-fringed legend, deities, mortals, Tempe, the dales of Arcady, men or gods, maidens loath, a mad pursuit, a struggle to escape, pipes and timbrels and wild ecstasy. Again, what is he talking about here? What do you think? Pause the video for a while if you want to. See if you can work it out. All right, did you get it? He's talking about what's painted on the urn, the pictures he can see. Let's slow down a bit here and look at this in some detail. Keats is describing the urn, he's telling us what he sees in the urn. Let's have a look and see exactly what he's talking about. So here's the urn, and I'm going to illustrate it according to his description. And again, if you'd like to imagine it for yourself before I draw the pictures, pause the video here and see what you can come up with in your mind. All right, here goes. First he talks about a leaf-fringed legend. So the story is surrounded by some kind of leafy border. Let's put that in. Then he talks about deities and mortals. So let's add a couple of figures here that may be human or may be divine. And he says Tempe or the dales of Arcady, which leads me to feel that it's something going on outside, something in the open air, in nature. Then he develops deities or mortals into men or gods. I'm going to add a few more figures. And then he talks about maidens loath. It seems that they're being pursued and are struggling to escape. Well, in my mind, that might look something like this. And then he introduces pipes and timbrels, musical instruments, which make me feel that perhaps what we're looking at here is some kind of party, a festival. Something like that is what I imagine Keats is looking at and describing to us in this first stanza of the poem. Did you picture it to yourself something like that in your mind's eye? Do you feel that you have a grasp on what Keats is describing in this opening stanza of the poem? I hope so. Stay tuned for my analysis of the second stanza. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore ye soft pipes play on, not to the sensual ear, but, more endeared, pipe to the spirit, ditties of no tone. Fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. The melodies the poet can only imagine are sweeter than those that he can actually hear. This recalls the first stanza, where the Sylvan historian, that is the urn, can express a flowery tale more sweetly than the poet can. And the fact that those melodies are unheard picks up on the quietness, the silence that he talks about in the first stanza. And of course that all makes sense because he can only see the picture on the urn. He can't hear the music, he can only imagine it. So the melodies he can only imagine are sweeter than melodies he can actually hear, and the tale he can create in his imagination from the pictures in the urn is sweeter than any tale he can tell in his rhyme, that is, in his poetry. Just as the story we can imagine from the pictures on the urn is sweeter than the story we can tell in words, so the music that we can imagine is more endeared than the music we hear with the sensual ear. We're beginning to get a kind of pattern here. Reality is ranged against imagination, and imagination is better.
That's something you might want to stop and think about. There's no right answer or wrong answer. It's just something you might like to pause and consider.
In the second part of the stanza, there's a lot of apparently negative stuff. Everything in the picture is frozen, unchanging, so the youth cannot stop singing, and the trees can never lose their leaves. The lover can never kiss the woman that he pursues, and she, less negatively perhaps, can never fade. And at the same time, he says, do not grieve, even though you don't have your fulfillment. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. That last line nullifies all those negatives. Never mind, he says to the figures in the picture. Never mind what you don't have, think about what you've got. In this world of the urn, this world that he imagines while looking at the urn, there are limits and there are possibilities. And the possibilities outweigh the limits.
Again, that's food for thought. Does the imagination have limits? Do its limits outweigh its possibilities? What do these lines mean to you?
This idea that there's another world, a better world, that can be reached through the imagination is something that Keats comes back to time and again in his poetry. But there's more to it than that. It's not so simple, as we shall see when we turn to the third stanza. Ah, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. And happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. All breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Well, there's one word that sets the tone for this stanza, and there are no prizes for guessing what it is. You can stop the video and think about it if you like, but I think it's pretty obvious. Yes, the word happy occurs 6 times. That's got to mean something. And this happiness is associated with the same things that he talked about before. The tree whose boughs can never lose their leaves and which will always be living in the springtime, the piper who will always be piping new songs, and the lover who will always be chasing the object of his love, forever panting and forever young. But the atmosphere, the tone of the poem, changes in the last two lines. In what way does it change? Pause the video if you want to think about it. Right. Somehow this happiness is all too much. It leaves the heart high sorrowful, suggesting a sorrow that comes from an excess of happiness, just as the word cloyed describes the discomfort that comes from too much sweetness. And the lover can never wipe his burning forehead or wet his parching tongue. This is very typical of Keats. He had a miserable life. His parents died when he was still a child. His brother died. His guardian kept his inheritance from him. He wasn't able to marry the woman he loved, and he too sickened and died at the age of 25. So it's no surprise, really, that he sought some escape from the sorrows of the world, that he tried to find relief from the miseries of life by entering a world of the imagination. What makes him so remarkable, though, the reason we still read his poetry today, is that instead of just escaping to some imaginary world of happiness, he realizes that even that world has its suffering, its pain, that in the end there can be no happiness, no joy, without sadness and grief. We'll see this even more clearly when we come to the fourth stanza. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadst thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore, or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of this folk this pious morn? And, little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. In this stanza, the poet introduces quite a few new elements. For example, we've got a mysterious priest, we've got a heifer, a cow, lowing at the skies, and with garlands of flowers about her flanks. And there are people coming to a sacrifice. There's an altar. How does this fit with the picture of the urn that we've built up so far? Yes, pause the video if you want to think about it. It's still the same urn, but now Keats is looking at it from a different angle, perhaps from the other side of the urn. So he's seeing a different picture. There's the heifer and the priest, and others are coming to the sacrifice. And what about the altar that he spoke of? Where would that be? Pause if you want to. It's not actually on the urn, is it? He asks the priest, to what altar are you leading the heifer? Which suggests that the altar is outside the urn, outside the picture. And that gives us a hint about the next part of the stanza, the little town. How do you think that fits in? Again, take your time, pause the video if you want to. Again, Keats is thinking outside the frame of the urn itself. Just as those people are going to an altar to sacrifice the cow, so they must have come from somewhere, and he imagines the little town that they have come from. Is it by a river, or by the sea, or in the mountains? He doesn't know. But what he does know is that, like everything in the world of the urn, it can never change, and it's not a source of happiness. The town is desolate, deserted, and miserable. echoing the word sorrowful used at the end of the previous stanza. As Keats enters more deeply into the world of the urn, seeing not only the various pictures painted on the urn itself, but also, in his imagination, envisaging the altar where the figures on the urn are going and the town from which they have come, it becomes more and more apparent that this is not just a world of happy, happy love, inhabited by beings who are forever panting and forever young. The heifer, decked with flowers as it is in fact going to be slaughtered. The town the figures have come from is forever deserted. Keats loses himself in the world of the urn, seeking perhaps to escape from the misery of the real world in which he finds himself. All too soon, though, he finds that the world of the urn, the world of imagination, is also tainted with pain and suffering. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity. Cold pastoral, when old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain, in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. There are one or two vocabulary points here. Attic means from Attica, that's the area around Athens. Breed is an old form of braid, that is to say braiding or embroidery, in other words decoration, ornamentation. And a pastoral is an ideal representation of country life. The first part of the stanza talks, once again, about what the urn is, and there's a fair bit of playing around with language in there. There's the alliteration of marble men and maidens, leading up to that word overwrought, which on the one hand suggests that the breed or braiding is highly decorated, too ornate even, and on the other suggests that the maidens are in a state of emotional excitement. And there's also that pun on the word breed, carrying as it does the idea of a race of men and maidens. And the second part of the stanza focuses, again, on what the urn does, contrasting it with the misery of the real world, in which the present generation will be wasted by old age, and future generations will have their own woe, their own sorrows. The urn, by contrast, teases us out of thought. This is an example of the negative capability, the ability to stop rationalizing and lose oneself in a sense of beauty and wonderment for which Keats is famous. This is an idea he develops at the end of the poem, saying that the message of the urn is that beauty is truth, and that truth is beauty, and we don't really need to know anything else in this life. There's probably been more debate about these last two lines than about the whole of the rest of the poem put together. For some, these last lines successfully express the aesthetic sensibility of a poet who seeks a form of truth that exists beyond rational thought, while for others, they represent a failure on the part of the poet to capture the deeper message of the poem, which is that we cannot escape from this world of pain and suffering into a world of beauty and imagination, because in that world too there will be suffering. There's no right or wrong way to understand this. It's simply something for each individual to think about.
Which, in the end, I suppose, is what poetry and literature are all about. Not to give us answers, but to give us something to think about. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and check out my other videos on poetry, drama and the novel, as well as videos on English language, history and other topics.